Bill Wells,
Give me just a second. Hold on, okay?
take your time.
All right. Amen. Pass the ammunition. You got it. See you tomorrow. Thank you, brother. Can you shut that? I got to do this interview. Just shut that if you don't mind. All right, Doc, I'm all yours. How can I help you, brother?
Bill Wells, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day for this. I really
Oh,
appreciate
sure.
it. I want to let you know that I've got we'll have about 15 total by the time we have our grand unveiling this fall. I'll give you a date, sometime over the summer.
Okay, yeah, keep me in the loop, yeah.
Love to have you there. And I just interviewed Monica Robbins from Channel 3 News to get her perspective on it as well.
Great lady, great
She's
reporter.
yes, she was tremendous. So I've got, the goal is to have all different varieties of people to get a view of the pandemic as a whole,
Okay.
not just healthcare, teachers, National Guardsmen, so on and so forth.
Okay.
And I wanted to get the media because you guys saw what was happening and you had a report on it versus just seeing it like we did. So
Right.
what was your first view or memory of the pandemic before it happened and when it happened?
Are we recording just so I know?
Yeah.
I don't want to talk too fast. Okay, just want to make sure. My first was a personal, like everybody else, only maybe a little bit different. We had our first grandson born in Raleigh, North Carolina. And my wife, for his first year, had been staying a lot in a place we had in Raleigh.
Okay.
Baby while my son and daughter-in-law were finishing college and all. So when the pandemic occurred early, she was in Raleigh. I was here working. I was going back and forth some. When it was on a Saturday morning, she called me that North Carolina was shutting down, that my son was a school teacher. He came home on Friday and said, hey, I'm not, we're shutting schools down. And she called me and said, I want to come home. I want to get out of here. We don't know what's happening. So I literally flew on Saturday morning on a flight to Raleigh on that Saturday. She and I drove back on Sunday.
Hang on, real quick. Hang on, did you have masks on the flight?
Yes. On the flight down was one of the strangest days because I was lucky enough to get at the time, I think it was a United flight went through Charlotte. And I was lucky enough to get a seat. And I got to the airport on Saturday to fly down. It was like a 1:30 flight. And Doc, it was the strangest feeling because I got to the airport and you thought it was closed. There's hardly anybody there.
Wow.
And I remember going through TSA and I had a mask, of course, already. And I'm walking after gate. There's nobody. It was like an eerie movie scene. And finally got to the gate where my flight was. And everybody, it was very quiet. I remember everybody kind of looked at each other. Nobody said anything. Because I think we all kind of felt, we're all nervous. Who knows what's going to happen? So I remember getting on a flight and a couple was across from me. And there was nobody next to me. Flight's probably half full. And this couple had the hand sanitizers and they're cleaning everything down. It was like all of a sudden you're like, well, this is odd. I mean, this is a new experience, and they were nervous. And so I fly to Raleigh. My wife and I leave early on a Sunday morning to drive home. Our daughter was staying with us at the time, and she called about noon, 1 o'clock. We're somewhere in West Virginia. And she said, hey, the governor is announcing they're closing restaurants and tonight. And, there's lines at the grocery store. And so on the way home, we stopped below Canton at a grocery store because we didn't know by the time we get home what. And literally this grocery store was a Heiden's in Canal Fulton. And I went in and it was busy and a lot of stuff was gone already. But it was like, let this sink in. I'm 2 hours from home and I'm stopping to get groceries because I'm worried if there's anything when I get home.
Exactly.
What stores are like when I get home. So it was a real personal thing. Then, so we get home on that Sunday and the governor that night announced bars and restaurants were closing that night. We had been talking about it a little bit on the show, but it was like everybody else as far as it was out in Washington State and there was the cruise ship and there was a neighborhood shut down. And, you just it was on the radar, but you just didn't have, none of us had that idea. I remember Monday's show. In my job, I get up real early, like before 3 o'clock. I always tell people I get up, I know before anyone if it's going to be a bad day because I see the news earlier or the Dow futures. And I got up on that Monday morning and I told myself, I said, in this job, I normally look at the news, figure out what might be important to my listener, and prioritize those stories. And that morning, it was just COVID. I don't care what it was. COVID was a part of the story because of the shutdown. And so, that's when the professional teams, the Indians at that time were starting to shut down out in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like every hour there was a wave of something new. The week before, the tournament had been canceled here for the MAC, and then a day or two into it, we had an outbreak of someone here at the station. At the time, it was someone's friend's mother's knew a niece who was at an event on a Saturday, and she may have had the sniffles. I mean, it was like, and this person now thinks they have COVID because they're just scared to death like everybody else. So we actually shut the facility down here, and I had to broadcast from my house for 2 days out of my basement.
So that was so Monday you go to work.
On Monday I go to work, and by about Tuesday or Wednesday it was of that week, I was broadcasting out of the basement of my house.
Wow.
And I've still got an image in my mind. Mike Snyder, who does sports with me, Scooter Reese is my producer. They came to my house. We decided that was the best place to do it from. And I had the governor scheduled to be on the show to talk about all this.
He was on Trevisano's show the Friday before, I think.
Pardon?
He was on Trevisano's show the Friday before.
The Friday before, could be.
Yeah.
So I've got the governor scheduled. Well, all of a sudden it dawns on us, how do we get a phone call on the air? I'm working a remote. There's nobody in the studio to put a phone on.
Oh, wow.
It's just the three of us. Yeah. So literally, Doc, old-fashioned. The governor and I, he's been great to me over the years. We've had a long-time relationship, and we had the cell phone number where he called my cell phone, and I interviewed him holding the cell phone up to the microphone.
Oh my gosh.
And it struck me, here I am in my basement on a 50,000-watt news talk radio station.
38 South Canada.
Talking to the governor early in a pandemic that we have no idea what life is going to be like, and he's on a cell phone. I'm holding a microphone up to hear his voice.
My gosh.
And just that basic, because at the time, I said to Mike Snyder and Scooter, our news guy, I said, we got to slow everything down. This is basic survival information. All of a sudden, I've been on the air when we've gone to war. I've been on the air when other stuff has happened. But this is survival. People are listening. What do they need to know to survive? Because at that time we didn't know anything.
Exactly.
My gosh, people are getting this pandemic and they're dying. What the world is turned upside down. So that was my early image of going through this.
You guys are critical to everybody else because we're going to listen to you first thing when we wake up to find out what's happening. What should we do? And I can imagine the pressure on you guys to make sure that you get the stories right, but you got to report something. But you have to be on the air. You have to be.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Other people are staying home. Their lives have changed in that way, but we're on the air. And I remember literally getting with Mike. I'm a man of faith. Mike and I, Snyder and Scooter and I, we actually prayed before we went on the air. And I just said, help us through this every hour as to what is important, what is going on. As a believer, I believe, God has everything in plan, in his planning and all, but to be a responsible broadcaster, I always go back to the basics. Be responsible. What do we know? What are we going to do with it? What do you need to know? What are the good questions for that person listening? And so that interview with the governor was a good example of we were going through like everybody else, and so was the governor, he and his family. What can we do, what we can't do in the state? And it was the basics. Well, Bill, the grocery stores will be open today. Past that, that's pretty much it. I mean, it was physically you look out and you see a blizzard and you see things are closed.
Right.
This you couldn't see, but boy, you knew it had an effect.
Big time. Your voice resonates with me when I'm a Cleveland guy.
Yeah.
And I remember the 9/11 event when you were on. I was pulling into I owned a company at the time. I was pulling in the driveway,
Yeah.
And you were talking with Casey Coleman about the size of the hole in
Oh,
in the
wow.
trade towers.
Right.
You said, well, it couldn't have been a small plane. I remember your voice.
Right.
It can't be. Look at the size of the hole in the building.
Right.
And so, and hearing your voice again during the pandemic was so reassuring, because it was critical. We have to hear, you guys have to be there. And I know you know this. I know you know this, but it's old news for you guys. But it's in times like what we've just been through, your voice and your calmness and everything else is critical to thousands upon thousands of people, because they listen to you every day, and it's more important now than ever.
You're very kind. That means a lot to me. And I'll tell you really quickly why I love radio, the medium of radio, and using words to paint pictures. And what you just said to me means everything, because it's what our goal is behind the microphone. It's a one-on-one medium. We may have 35,000 people listening a quarter hour, but it's you and I. Now, here's what's unique. You and I have never met.
Yeah.
But yet you feel like you have a relationship with me. And that's tremendous. And that's what it's all about. And I appreciate those comments. And I mean that sincerely. I'll bet you, geez, we're 22 years plus after 9/11, and you just reminded me of this. I'll bet you about every other month, if I'm out and about, somebody will come up to me, even to this day, and say what you just said. Hey, Bill, always wanted to meet you. I was listening the morning of 9/11, and to that point, a lot of those same people were listening the first morning of the pandemic.
They were,
and I'm honored by that. And I just try my best to, express and understand as best I can, put myself in your shoes as a listener as to what you're going through, because I'm going through it too. But that means a lot to me. I really appreciate that.
well, you're most welcome. But it's critical for let's just say a community or a state or whatever, how we want to say it, to know that someone else is out there.
Yeah.
Because if you, I mean, it happened in St. Petersburg in the Second World War when they had it surrounded, and all they played was a metronome for about a day and a half. Because, but you have to know, people have to know that someone else is out there, or they're gonna do terrible things or commit suicide or whatever. And so to have your voice out there, you're right, one-on-one. I heard you, but I didn't sit in a theater listening to your voice. I was at home listening to your voice. So it was critical to have you guys out there, and you really helped me and everybody else through that.
It means a lot. Radio is such a unique medium. You think of Churchill rally the country, FDR rally the country through the radio, because with words, you can, as the great Paul Harvey said, I can paint more pictures with words than you can ever show on television.
Oh, I love Paul Harvey.
And especially, sadly, with news like this pandemic, it was a good reminder of just, you're right. People were hunkered down, yet they needed a face or a voice. In my case, it's the voice with radio, to know there is an outside world and what's going on.
Now, did you guys ever have the feeling, knowing that all the sports shut down, that you were it in terms of what we could listen to?
Well, you know what's, I chuckle a little. You mentioned sports, because Mike Snyder is a big part of the show, which is sports.
Yep, I love Michael.
And of course, it dawned on us within a day or two, there's no sports, and there wasn't for a long time. Now, for a while, the angle was what different sports teams and franchises, leagues are doing with the pandemic, because they were dealing with like everyone. So there's an angle to that. But after a while, we even tried to do the fake highlights. There were people putting together fake games on the internet on who's playing who, just to keep people busy. We did that a little bit. But with sports, when it shut down, again, you mentioned 9/11. It was in a way like the early days of 9/11, because the country also stopped. Yep. Nobody was flying, nobody was going, nobody was going anywhere. So we had a little bit of a benchmark as far as emotion, as with the early days of 9/11 with the pandemic. But with sports, it was the same way. It was like, okay, that's a big part of the show. How are those teams dealing with? Because they're humans too, and they've got families, and they're worried as well.
But for us, the only thing we had to watch or listen to was news.
Yeah,
that was it.
Yeah.
And I realized the value of that diversion early on, and it was let's say for the first month and a half, you're glued to the TV, glued to the radio. And then after a while, you get tired of it because you want to hear something else. And there was nothing else to listen to.
Right.
There was nothing else.
You're right. And it was, it's a great, you look back early on when the governor had his daily briefings. That was must listen to, must watch. And then sadly, again, I'll mention 9/11. You know this from psychologists, after a week or two, were telling you, like, you got to turn that off. You can't be. But yet with the pandemic, I can't go to work. My kids can't go to school. I don't know if I can't hug my family. I can't even talk to my neighbor. You know, it was such a psychologically challenging time for any of us through this.
You know, I did interview a couple of different coroners last year on this.
Oh, wow.
And I asked them about the suicide rates during this time. And they said, we didn't have any increase in suicides. In fact, we had a decrease. They said, what we did see was an increase in overdoses right after the first stimulus check.
Right.
And that struck me. This was last year. It struck me. I was like, because people had money that they don't normally have.
Yeah.
They can buy more of things that they never bought before, and they overdosed. And so all across the state, I don't know about the state, but all across the state, there's a huge increase in that. What interviews do you stick out with you in terms of that first month, let's just say, that really stand out? What images from who you talk to really stand out?
I would say the governor, first and foremost, that day in my basement when I'm standing there on a cell phone, talking to the governor of Ohio about the state being shut down in a pandemic, just the logistics of that. Past that, we had a doctor Simone Wilds, supplied to us through ABC Radio. She's an infectious disease physician. And she was fabulous about, here's the information, here's what we know. And when I was able to talk to her almost daily, because there was so much information, I tried to prioritize. Here's 2 or 3 things in the last day that have come out. Is this true? Is this not true? Because so much of it we still don't know.
Exactly.
But I would say that information and talking to her, and then a little bit of a twist on it. Our health commissioner here in the county was on with me several times. And at one point, after a few weeks, to your point about you got to get away from it somehow, yet we can't, I started being interested in how physicians were handling their jobs, because you and I were in school and at junior high or whatever, we flipped the page and they showed us pictures of the Spanish flu, right?
Yep.
Well, if you're in the medical profession, sadly, what a fascinating time to be practicing medicine, which is what you're doing.
Yep.
You're practicing your gift, if you will, of medicine in the time of a pandemic and trying to learn how people react. And so I had a couple interviews like that with docs that I enjoyed, or at least were challenged, and I thought were good information. So I would say those would be a couple, just some highlights that come to mind.
I interviewed a Columbian hospital nurse out of New York, and I asked her some of the biggest challenges. She said in the first 2 months, this was in New York City. She said, when we get all these patients in, we had to trach them. And then she went on, and I said, wait. You had thousands of patients that you trached. Then what would you do with them? She said, well, we just set them aside. We trach them, and then we set them aside with them. I'm like, I couldn't even imagine it.
Right.
And it was just amazing to me.
Well, you remember this, and people do the images of, again, I talk about radio painting a picture of freezer trucks outside hospitals.
Yep.
And you're like, what? And then there was talk about, the Red Cross and the Navy sending a ship into New York because they need ventilators. And just the logistics that we were just talking about, were just amazing. And I think we all have this experience now. We walk past at the grocery store hand sanitizers or the wipes, and we look over and think, man, there was one point I'm grabbing as many as I can. I always walk by, I don't need that this week. We move on. But at the time, those basic needs, you were shocked that why are we talking about this?
Living through a historical marker like we did is an amazing event to me. And when I was my grandmother lived through the Spanish flu of 1918.
Oh, wow.
And so she talked about it. And, we live in a small town called Kirtland, which is, about 20 miles east of the city.
Sure.
And you go to the graveyard every Memorial Day, as we do. My dad was a World War II Marine. And we'd go there and you would see the families of that year, the headstones. there'd be 7 of them or 8 of them. It wiped out families of people. And so I
Right.
thought, wow, that's because we didn't have good science back then. We didn't have, and it's like, no, that's
Right.
what diseases can do. When
Right.
did you start to really feel that we're getting out of it? What time and how'd you feel? And what was a marker for that?
Um,
Or do you feel that yet?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, do we feel it yet? I mean, life's changed for all of us. I would say it's interesting when we do traffic reports every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, when no one was going to work, there was, traffic reports were pretty short. I would say, to answer your question, the trend, I look at trends. Yes, when the teams went back to play, that was a day. Hey, we finally got a baseball game.
Right.
But I remember that first week when you sensed that people were getting back to work somehow. In service jobs, I think we take it for granted. Everybody sits in an office and we talk about, well, if people work remotely. Well, 3/4 of the country keeps the country moving. You got to leave your house and do your job.
Yeah.
And after about, not that we were coming out of it, but I think there were 2 points. After about a week, we started to notice more traffic flow around the suburbs. And you thought, okay, people are getting out. And then it was almost probably after we got to that next winter, when the vaccine came out, and you had schools kind of doing the remote / it was a year into it when I started to see traffic reports. Literally, we started reporting on wrecks. You thought, there's enough people on the road. We got wrecks now, and that was probably one of the trends. I thought, okay, we're kind of getting back. We're living with this, and we still got to get to work and keep the economy humming and that sort of thing. I'd say that was a sign.
For me, the first thing that gave me hope was May of 20. I think it was it May or 21? I can remember. May of 21, maybe. We had the first NASCAR event. I'm not a NASCAR fan,
Yeah.
but they had it empty, of course, but they had it. I said, okay, so it gave me hope that we can adjust.
Yes.
We weren't over it, but we're learning to adjust.
Yes.
And that was a big deal to me. But for me, when I think it hit me how bad it was in the fall of 20, early 21, when the nursing homes were just getting hit by it was amazing how many people I saw in the paper. In the obituary column, this little small town.
Yeah.
But I felt that when the kids went back to school with masks in the fall of 21, that was when it first started for me that, okay, we're learning how to adapt.
Yeah.
And it'll be a gradual way to come out of it, but we're learning how to adapt, and that was a big deal.
I'll share 2 personal things if it helps you.
Yes.
My mother-in-law is in a nursing home in Blanchester near Cincinnati, near where we grew up. So to your point, we went months without being able to see her. And so my wife would be on the phone with her, and you're trying to trust the people around her, providing her with what she needs.
Mm-hmm.
She did have COVID, came through it. We lost my mother in Florida in August of 2020, but it wasn't COVID related. She had some cancer treatments. The sad thing was, and I made a couple of trips down, my father could be with her when she was in a hospital. She was transferred back and forth between a hospital and a nursing home, rehab a couple of times. And the rules in Florida were strange, where he could be with her if she was in the hospital. But as soon as she went back to the nursing home, he couldn't be with her. So one weekend when I was in Florida, I've still got video on my phone of my mom, who about a month before she passed, I could see her through a window. And I experienced what I'm trying to share. I experienced what I think you're talking about, so many families who were disconnected. Here's my mom. She's 6 feet away from me. She's in a wheelchair. She's got a mask on, and I can't touch her. I can't, our eyes are connecting. She's on a cell phone talking to my dad, and I just stood there and cried because they've been married. She's almost 60 years, and that last hug is always the most important one.
Yep.
And sadly, but it wasn't COVID related. So it's kind of funny. I say to people when we lost my mom, but it wasn't COVID. It's like, well, does it make a difference? Why? But it just that was the reason we lost so many lives.
Exactly. My mom went through it. She's alive. She had COVID twice.
Okay.
And it affected her mentally a lot more. So for a month there, I get like 20 phone calls a day.
Right.
And I answered every one of them. And she's in a nursing home in Chardon, but it was the same thing, and she made it through. But for the first year, I remember I talked to her on the phone, and she would say, there was a nice young man that took back to lunch every week. I wonder whatever happened to him. I think he died. I'm like, well, Mom, yeah, because if I tell her that it's me, she wouldn't get the connection because I'm the guy who calls now every day. But there was a nice young man that went to see her once a week who was me, who doesn't show up anymore. So that was one of those things I had to explain to her. It was just too funny. Yes,
if I could
please.
just loop back to something else. I've talked about the governor several times. Governor DeWine has been, I've just known him a long time. And it reminds me of the political environment that he has dealt with this year,
big time.
the primary, and everybody being mad of what he did at the time with nursing homes and businesses. And I only remember it, and he and I talked about this a couple times on the air. You know, he and Fran, they couldn't see their family. I mean, these same rules about nursing homes, he had to live through as well.
Yeah.
And here he is, the governor, making these calls. He could change it in a heartbeat, but at the time he felt it was the wrong thing. Only dealing with even in your profession, I've tried to give everybody a pass the last couple of years because we need more grace than ever. We have been dealing with something like never before. And whether you're a teacher, whether you're running a business, whether you're on the radio, the understanding that as frustrated as you are, that person is on the other side of the phone or the other side of the table as well with what we've had to deal with.
And it's one of those things that I told my kids this because my kids are in their 30s.
Yeah.
I said, you're living through an historical marker.
Yep.
And this will be looked upon years and years and years from now as to how you went through it, and you can talk about it. And it's an amazing thing.
I told my kids, I hope we get through this, and I pray you never have to do it again.
Exactly. One more thing, and I'm going to keep you. I had this idea last year, and this is just an aside. Yeah. But I want your opinion on this. I won't quote you or anything, but I want your opinion on this because you have your pulse of the community. I want to try to give back to the people who are, let's call them the first responders, okay, to the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the ideas that I've got, and I'm talking to Senator Brown about this next week because I've known him for a long time.
Yeah.
Is that what if we created a kind of GI Bill for them that they can have 2 years of education, either they use it, pay all their student loans, or give it to their kids for what they went through, because they protected, they went to war for us for 2 years. Yeah. And I think it's gonna be a good gesture we can do for them.
Great idea. Great idea. I compliment you on it. I guess right away, when you say first responder, something else struck me because I was given, I still carry it to this day, it's an emergency card that they gave me. You talked about another day that struck me, and I forget about this. I still carry this with me in my billfold. Management here, because we were on the air, gave me, it's an emergency response team card, critical operations employee. It's got my name, I got an ID on it.
Wow.
It expires November of 2024. They handed this to me and they said, if you're stopped going to work, show them this. I said, what do you mean stopped? Because again, we're going back early in the pandemic. People, is there going to be martial law? We got to keep people. No, well, you just show this card, and I still carry it. So having said that, I remember being at the grocery store about a week into this, standing there at the meat counter, and the guy I kind of got to know a little bit over the years, Don, he's the guy who cuts the meat. I go in and, if he's there, hey, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. He didn't know me from Adam, but just how you doing? And I remember him saying to me, he looked up, he was cutting my turkey, and he looked up, he goes, I'm a critical employee. I got a job. He said, my brother's an attorney. He got laid off, so I got to call my dad, who never thought I would succeed in life. And Dad, I still got a job. I'm a critical employee. I'm cutting meat today.
Wow.
So I guess I only say that for your comment. I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, but I guess the category of first responders, nurses, people who, even the guy cutting meat was taking a chance being out that first week.
That's why I don't want to say, I don't want to say healthcare workers. I want to say
Right.
first responders.
Right.
Because I put people in that group, like teachers.
No, it is a great idea. And I'd love to hear what Senator Brown would say, but it's a great idea. I'm just not sure how you categorize.
That's in the details, but I think it's something that we should consider.
Absolutely.
Because we got to say thank you somehow as a nation.
Yep.
And this would do it. And I don't want to go 4 years.
Founders Day, something like that.
Something.
They set aside. Yeah.
Something. So, Bill Wills, you've been fantastic as always.
Doc, thank you.
It's good to hear your voice, and I'll let you know as things progress, okay?
please keep me in the loop. Thank you for listening. Thank you for thinking of me for this project. I'm really flattered, and I wish you nothing but the best, and keep me in the loop. We'd love to promote it and talk about it, okay?
Appreciate it very much. Thanks so much.
All right, Doc, all the best.
Yep,
Bye.
bye-bye.